Travis Malone hadn't eaten in 3 days. That morning, he'd woken up under the loading dock behind a discount furniture store, bones aching, stomach turning on itself. He knew better than to linger. Too many complaints led to police calls, but there was nowhere else to go. The cold made every thought blurrier, except one. He needed food. Not out of want, out of necessity. The corner store wasn't new to him. He'd passed by it countless times, collected cans out front, sometimes nodded at the kid who stocked the shelves. He never asked for anything. People assumed that meant he didn't need anything. But inside that store, just past the counter, there was a basket where they threw the unsold bread. The ones they didn't donate, didn't toss. Just old enough to forget. It was just past noon when Travis slipped inside. He waited for the owner, Mr. Rabin, to turn his back. The man was talking to a customer near the freezer aisle. Travis moved slow, the way you learn to move when people stop looking at you. His fingers wrapped around a day-old loaf. It was stiff, dry at the edges. He tucked it beneath his coat and made for the door. "Hey, stop right there!" The voice cut through the low hum of the refrigerators. Travis stopped moving. He didn't panic, didn't bolt. He turned just enough to see Mr. Rabin already picking up the phone. "I'm calling the cops." He didn't say anything. He didn't plead. The bread sat awkwardly in his coat, the zipper only halfway up. He stayed where he was, still as the floor tiles. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived. One was older, already flipping through his notepad. The other was new. You could hear it in the way he approached. The younger one asked about the dog tags around Travis's neck. They were barely readable now, worn smooth over time. Travis nodded. The officer looked confused, a little guilty maybe, but followed procedure. Mr. Rabin was pressing charges, said it wasn't the first time. Claimed Travis had taken from the store twice in the past year, always small things, always food. At the precinct, he was booked like anyone else. Fingerprinted, processed. There was no special line for veterans who hadn't eaten. No checkbox for hunger. Just petty theft and a half-empty cell where the air smelled like bleach and steel. A public defender came through, said her name fast, barely looked at him. She was young, overwhelmed, already scribbling notes on another case. Travis listened, said little. He'd been through things worse than this, and somehow this still stung differently. "You have a court appearance tomorrow morning," she said, then moved on. He didn't sleep much that night. The cot creaked every time someone rolled over. The lights never really turned off. Somewhere near dawn, someone cursed out loud. A guard told them to shut it. The room fell back into silence. By 9 a.m., Travis was in the holding area, waiting to be called. His name didn't mean much to anyone in that building. Just another man caught stealing bread, wearing the same coat, the same threadbare jeans. No one noticed the way he kept one hand near his chest, where his dog tags rested under his shirt. No one knew what that meant. Not yet. Inside the courtroom, a clerk shuffled papers and read off names like items in a grocery list. Case number 58-114, State versus Travis Malone. He was led forward. No one in the audience looked up. There were a few reporters in the back, tapping away at laptops, waiting for the gang case scheduled later. A few public defenders whispered near the benches. The judge didn't glance up from his file. The prosecutor, barely older than Travis's grandson might have been, if he had one, adjusted his tie and began reading. The defendant was apprehended while attempting to steal a loaf of bread from Rubin's Corner Market. Given prior offenses and the absence of a fixed residence, the state recommends continued detention pending trial. It was routine, predictable, just another case moving through the gears of the system. The judge, Carlton Hughes, finally looked up. "Mr. Malone, how do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The room didn't react. Someone in the back row stifled a laugh. The judge ignored it. He scanned the case file again. Then his eyes caught on a line. He paused, flipped a page. His face stiffened. He read aloud, "Travis Eugene Malone, former Staff Sergeant, United States Army." A hush fell over the courtroom. The sound of shuffling papers stopped. The judge's lips moved, but he didn't speak for a moment. He set the file down. Then, against every protocol, every routine expectation, he stood up. Judges don't stand mid-hearing. It wasn't recess. No motion had been made. The room froze in confusion. The prosecutor glanced at the bailiff, who didn't know what to do. The clerk looked up, waiting for direction. "Court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Hughes said, voice unexpectedly strained. The defendant will remain. And then he turned and walked back to his chambers. Travis stayed where he was, hands loose at his sides. He didn't turn around, didn't ask why. He'd stopped expecting the world to offer explanations. Somewhere behind him, people whispered. The courtroom, which had dismissed him as just another homeless man, was beginning to realize that his name carried weight, not just in the file, but somewhere else, somewhere long forgotten. And behind a closed door, a judge began to remember the day someone had refused to leave him behind. Behind the closed door of his chambers, Judge Carlton Hughes sat at his desk, staring at a drawer he hadn't opened in years. It was never locked, just avoided. He slid it open and pulled out a photograph he always kept tucked beneath some old files. The image was faded, corners soft, colors dulled by time. A group of soldiers stood in front of a medical tent, dust clinging to their uniforms. Carlton was there, second from the left, arms crossed, younger, before law school, before the robe. His eyes scanned the back row until they landed on a tall figure with arms folded across his chest. Travis Malone. He hadn't heard that name in 20 years. In Iraq, they didn't use first names much, just call signs and last names. In the heat of combat, Travis had been Malone, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't flinch when everything fell apart. Carlton's mind snapped back to Fallujah, July 2003, a routine convoy run that turned into chaos, explosions, screams, fire. Carlton had been thrown against the side of a truck, his leg shattered, blood pouring fast. He remembered crawling, then stopping, and then being lifted, hauled through smoke and bullets. 2 miles, he later learned. Malone never let go. Carlton had never gotten the chance to say thank you. After the medevac, he'd spent months in a hospital in Germany. By the time he recovered, Malone had been discharged. No forwarding address, no contact, just a ghost with a firm grip and a quiet voice who vanished after saving his life. He booted up his computer and logged into a secure system he still had access to through his volunteer work with Veteran Affairs. It took several minutes, but he found what he was looking for. Malone's military service record. 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Logistics specialist, Bronze Star recipient. Injured in 2003 while evacuating wounded soldiers during an ambush. One of those wounded soldiers was a medic, Private First Class Carlton Hughes. The report was straightforward. No drama in the language, no embellishments, just facts. Malone drove a burning fuel truck away from a group of pinned-down soldiers, saving 17 lives, took shrapnel to the leg, refused treatment until every last soldier had been accounted for. Carlton found an old scanned clipping from the New York Times, Travis carrying an injured Afghan child to a medevac chopper during a humanitarian operation. The headline had once read, "A Soldier's Mercy." But there was something else. A second report, recently declassified. July 2003. During the evacuation in Fallujah, Malone had carried an injured medic, Hughes himself, 2 miles to safety, under enemy fire. Carlton had never seen that report, never known the full extent. He'd spent years trying to find the man who'd saved his life, only ever knowing him as Grady or Malone shouted over the roar of gunfire. He leaned back, hands resting on the desk. His breath caught. His throat felt tight. He picked up the phone and dialed the Veteran Affairs Liaison Office. The woman who answered recognized his voice immediately. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need verification. Travis Malone. Service record, pension history, last known status. Urgent." 10 minutes later, the answer came. Travis Malone's VA benefits had been terminated in 2008 due to failure to respond to a verification letter mailed to an outdated address. No follow-up, no appeal, just gone. No payments since then, no medical coverage, nothing. He called someone else. "Colonel Bishop?" he said when the line picked up. "It's Judge Carlton Hughes. I found him." There was a pause on the line. "The man who carried me out at Fallujah," Hughes continued. "He's in my courtroom. He's homeless, charged with stealing bread." Silence. Then finally, "Where?" "Brooklyn." "Don't let this become just another story," Hughes said. "I need someone to see him." "I'm 3 hours out," Bishop replied. "I'm coming." Before stepping out of his office, Hughes scribbled something on official letterhead and folded it once. He handed it to his clerk without a word. She looked confused, but didn't question it. He walked back into the courtroom 15 minutes later, his robe stiff, his face unreadable. The courtroom quieted immediately. No one knew what had happened during the break. The prosecutor looked up, confused by the delay. The public defender shuffled papers without conviction. Hughes cleared his throat. This court will postpone further proceedings pending a full investigation into the defendant's background, he said. The defendant will remain in custody overnight. We will reconvene tomorrow. He paused. Ensure Mr. Malone receives a proper meal and medical attention. No one objected. As Travis was led out of the room, he didn't react. He didn't ask why. He didn't seem surprised. He had lived too long on the outer edge of attention to expect anything different. But something had changed. Not in him, but around him. That evening, a local crime blog published a story titled, "Bread Thief Claims to be War Hero. Judge Delays Sentencing." The comments exploded. Most were dismissive. Another faker. If he's a vet, why's he homeless? Stolen valor. Again. Inside the holding cell that night, a younger inmate shoved Travis hard against the wall. "My brother died in Kandahar," the kid spat. "You think wearing tags gets you sympathy?" Travis didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just sat in the corner, silent, holding the only things that had ever meant anything anymore: his tags and a plastic-wrapped photo of a woman with a soft smile. He wondered, not for the first time, how much longer he could stay invisible before the world truly saw him. The next morning came without ceremony. Travis was woken before sunrise, handed a cup of lukewarm coffee, and led down a hallway lined with peeling paint and hollow stairs. He didn't ask where they were taking him. He'd learned long ago that the system never offered explanations, only destinations. The courtroom looked different than the day before, not in structure, but in presence. Every seat was filled. Reporters who had ignored his hearing now leaned forward in their chairs. A camera crew from a local station waited outside, barred from entry but angling for sound bites. Something had shifted overnight, and Travis felt it, even if he didn't understand it. He was led to the same seat beside the defense table, but his court-appointed lawyer was gone. In her place sat an older man with a silver tie clip and a briefcase that looked worn but expensive. The man introduced himself with a nod. "Richard Harlow, Veterans Legal Defense Alliance." Travis blinked. He didn't ask questions. As they waited, Travis watched the door at the back of the courtroom. At first, nothing happened. Then it opened. The audience rose to their feet, not just for the judge, but for 3 uniformed military officers who entered behind the court officers. Their dress blues were crisp, medals gleaming. Travis's eyes narrowed. He hadn't seen uniforms like that since Kabul. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Carlton Hughes," the bailiff announced. Judge Hughes entered, face composed, voice calm. He sat, looked around the room, and spoke with a clarity that made every pen pause mid-sentence. "Before we address the charges against Mr. Malone, this court will hear relevant testimony pertaining to the defendant's background." Murmurs rustled across the gallery. A man stepped forward. Colonel Andrew Bishop, Fort Hamilton. His posture rigid, voice trained by decades of command. He was sworn in, then turned to face the room, and Travis. "I have known Staff Sergeant Travis Malone since our first deployment to Iraq in 2003, he began. "This man saved the lives of 17 soldiers when our convoy was ambushed near Fallujah. Under direct enemy fire, he drove a burning fuel truck away from our position, sustaining second-degree burns but preventing an explosion that would have killed everyone within 50 yards. Whispers spread. Reporters scribbled faster. Some of the jurors sat back, stunned. Colonel Bishop continued. "During that same engagement, Sergeant Malone carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Carlton Hughes, 2 miles to the extraction point, while under fire and suffering from shrapnel injuries." All heads turned to the bench. Judge Hughes nodded once, confirming the statement. It was the first time anyone in the courtroom had seen his composure break. It lasted only a moment. The prosecutor stood, unsure. "Your Honor, while this testimony speaks to the defendant's past, it does not negate the fact that a theft occurred." Colonel Bishop interrupted without hesitation. "With respect, there's more. After reviewing Mr. Malone's VA file, we've discovered that his pension and medical benefits were erroneously terminated in 2008 due to a system migration. He never received notice. All communication was sent to an address he no longer occupied. Since then, he has been living without any of the benefits he earned. Our office has calculated that Mr. Malone is owed approximately $1,370 per month for the past 15 years, plus medical coverage. That totals over $246,000 in unpaid benefits. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Travis seemed to falter for a moment, his hands tightening around the table's edge. The information wasn't just unexpected, it was unimaginable. Colonel Bishop wasn't finished. We've also gathered affidavits from 5 soldiers who served under and beside Mr. Malone. Included in that is a letter from General Thomas Richards, who credits Sergeant Malone with saving his son during the same ambush. Judge Hughes leaned forward. His voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Malone, would you please approach the bench?" Travis stood slowly. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look anything. The judge continued. "Protocol would normally prevent me from presiding over a case involving someone with whom I have a personal connection. Yesterday, I did not recognize you, but once I read your full file, I understood." He took a breath. "You are the man who carried me through fire. I never knew your name, just your voice yelling through the noise." There was a collective exhale in the courtroom. Judge Hughes took off his glasses. "I've spent the last 2 decades trying to find you, not to repay you, just to say thank you." Travis stared ahead. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "I was just doing my job." "No," the judge said, shaking his head. "You did far more." He turned to the prosecutor. "In light of these extraordinary revelations, does the state wish to proceed?" The young man stood slowly, clearly moved. "No, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice." "So ordered," Judge Hughes replied. He looked at Travis again. "Mr. Malone, you are free to go, and this court owes you an apology for the failures that brought you here today, not just legal, but moral." Travis remained still, as if the words hadn't quite landed. Then the courtroom doors opened once more. A woman in her 30s stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the room until they found Travis. She walked toward him, voice trembling. "Uncle Travis, we've been looking for you for years." He didn't speak. He didn't move. She stepped closer and embraced him. The courtroom fell into silence again, but this time it was reverent. Reporters rushed toward Colonel Bishop outside the courtroom, but he stopped them with a single sentence. "This isn't about one man. It's about every man like him the system forgot and what we're going to do about it now." By late afternoon, the story had moved beyond the courtroom. Local news stations ran with it first, replaying footage of Travis Malone's case dismissal, cutting between images of him in donated clothes and grainy photos from his time in uniform. Within hours, national outlets picked it up. Headlines called him a forgotten hero, a living contradiction, a ghost of war rediscovered in a Brooklyn courtroom. The internet responded as it always did, some with disbelief, others with outrage, many with compassion they didn't know they still had. News helicopters circled the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the steps outside. Somewhere in the crowd, Mr. Rebin, the store owner who'd filed the charges, made his way through. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. "I didn't know," he said softly when he reached Travis. "I thought you were just another troublemaker. I never stopped to ask who you used to be. I'm ashamed." Travis didn't say anything. He nodded once. By nightfall, a veterans nonprofit launched a fundraiser for him. Within 48 hours, it surpassed $200,000. Social media lit up with stories of other veterans who had slipped through similar cracks, names no one knew, stories never told. The Department of Veterans Affairs issued a statement promising a thorough audit of benefit terminations dating back a decade. Judge Hughes recused himself from the case immediately after the dismissal. Judicial ethics required it, but that didn't stop him from staying involved. Privately, as a citizen, as someone with a debt that no courtroom could discharge. In a quiet office with no cameras, he met Travis again. No robes, no walls of authority between them. Just a man who had once been carried through fire sitting across from the one who'd refused to let him die. "You carried me 2 miles," Hughes said quietly, "with metal in your leg. I didn't know that part until yesterday." "You were worse off than me," Travis replied. The judge leaned forward. "You said something to me back then. I was drifting in and out. I didn't even know if I'd live. But you kept saying it over and over. Just keep breathing, kid. Your story isn't over. You remember that?" Travis nodded. "I remember." "Those words pulled me back," Hughes said. "I became a judge because I wanted to serve in a way that still meant something. I built a life, family, career, purpose. All of it started with those words. I didn't know your name. I never stopped hearing your voice. Travis looked at him, not as a judge, but as the medic he once dragged through hell. For the first time in years, he saw someone not as a symbol, but as a person, shaped by something he'd almost forgotten he had once done right. No man left behind, Travis said. That wasn't just a slogan to me. 3 days later, he stood in Judge Hughes's chambers again, this time in a clean suit, his military decorations displayed across his chest for the first time since discharge. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, unit commendations. His posture was straight, his silence still intact, but heavier now with meaning. A representative from the VA arrived to formally present him with the full amount of his back benefits, along with an additional settlement for the error that cost him 15 years of dignity and health care. Cameras flashed, news anchors narrated. Travis said little. I don't want pity, he told the microphones. I want the ones who come after me to be remembered while they're still breathing, not once they've disappeared. That soundbite alone made the evening news. His story became more than one of redemption. It sparked legislation. Senators referenced his case when introducing bills to reform the process for terminating benefits. State governments launched pilot programs to connect unhoused veterans with legal advocates. The military photo of Travis carrying the Afghan child resurfaced, now paired with a photo of him sleeping on the sidewalk outside Prospect Park. Together, they formed a brutal indictment of national priorities and a rallying cry to shift them. Back in Brooklyn, outside the courthouse where it all began, a bronze plaque was installed. It read, "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." Next to it stood a relief sculpture of Travis carrying an injured medic through sand and smoke, the American flag raised in the background. No caption, just a name. In a classroom uptown, a 10-year-old boy who had often seen Travis collecting bottles submitted an essay to his school newspaper. The title was simple, "Not everyone in torn clothes is bad." In it, he wrote, "Some people wear memories instead." His teacher sent it to the mayor's office. The city council read it aloud during a session on homelessness policy. It passed a resolution to establish the Grady Initiative, a new legal assistance fund for homeless veterans, named not for Travis's legal identity, but the man he had once been in uniform, Sergeant Grady. Despite the spotlight, Travis declined most interview requests. He didn't want to become a symbol. He wanted to be a man again. But he did agree to speak at local schools, inner-city high schools mostly, where he talked about what happened after war, after discharge, after the medals stopped meaning anything. He didn't dramatize. He didn't sugarcoat. He just told the truth. He became a familiar presence at Prospect Park, not collecting bottles anymore, just sitting, watching kids play, sometimes on the same bench he'd once used to shield himself from wind and rain. A new chapter had begun, but he hadn't forgotten the ones written in silence and hunger. The people who once walked past him now greeted him by name. Travis. Not, "Hey man," or "You again." Just Travis. And slowly, piece by piece, the country that had once failed him began to remember him, not just for the medals or the misery, but for enduring long enough to be seen again. And 6 months later, Travis moved into Veterans Village, a supportive housing complex in Brooklyn designed for those who had worn the uniform and somehow ended up on the margins. The apartment was small. Just a kitchenette, a bed, a window that faced a quiet street. But it was the first place he'd been able to lock a door behind him since Margaret died. He didn't bring much with him. A duffel bag with clothes, a folder with documents, the photo of Margaret, which he framed and set on the windowsill. On one wall, he pinned 3 photographs, one of their wedding day, one of his unit in Iraq, and a new one. A recent picture of him standing beside Judge Hughes at a veterans recognition ceremony, both of them in dress attire, both of them smiling faintly under the weight of the moment. Travis declined most interview requests. The story had gone viral, but he refused to let it consume him. He didn't want to be a headline or a cause. He'd lived in silence too long to be comfortable with attention. When the VA offered to fly him to D.C. for a televised ceremony, he politely refused. But when a local principal asked if he would consider speaking at a public high school in Brownsville, he said yes. He didn't bring a script. He didn't dress in uniform. He stood in front of 100 restless teenagers in a cracked auditorium and told them what it was like to return from war with medals in one hand and grief in the other. He told them how easy it was to fall through the cracks, how quickly you could go from someone to no one if the wrong letter got mailed to the wrong address. He didn't moralize. He didn't ask for their sympathy. He only asked that they pay attention to the people no one else did. Afterward, a teacher pulled him aside and said a student who hadn't spoken all semester had stayed behind to ask if he could meet the man who used to be invisible. That was enough. Word spread. More schools invited him. Community centers, shelters. At each place, he told a variation of the same story, not about war, but about survival afterward, about how silence becomes habit, how shame becomes armor, how being forgotten feels worse than being wounded. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The mayor's office, responding to growing pressure from veteran advocacy groups, named him an advisor to the city's task force on homelessness among veterans. He declined a salary but accepted a seat at the table. At meetings, he rarely spoke first. But when he did, no one interrupted. Outside the Brooklyn courthouse, the plaque bearing his name became a gathering place. Tourists took photos. Veterans touched the sculpture. Sometimes strangers left flowers or small flags. Once, someone laid down an unopened loaf of bread. One Sunday afternoon, Judge Hughes invited him to dinner. It became a quiet tradition. Once a month, Travis would sit at the judge's kitchen table, eating roast chicken or pot pie, listening to Hughes's kids talk about school and sports and friends. He never interrupted, but always listened. Hughes's wife once said, "You don't talk much." Travis smiled and replied, "I did enough yelling for a lifetime." One evening, over coffee, the judge's son, about 15, asked him a question no one had asked him directly before. "Are you angry? About being homeless for so long?" Travis looked at the boy for a long time before answering. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm just grateful the story didn't end there." On Veterans Day, Travis stood before a crowd at Fort Hamilton. He hadn't worn his full-dress uniform in over a decade, but now it fit perfectly. The medals sat on his chest like punctuation marks on a sentence that had taken years to finish. He didn't prepare a long speech, just a few lines. "I once protected this country," he said. "Now, the country has protected me back. Kindness isn't something that expires. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for it." The crowd didn't applaud right away. They stood, silently. Then, one by one, hands rose in salute, not to the rank, but to the endurance. After the ceremony, he walked back to the bench in Prospect Park. Not the one closest to the fountain or the one with the brass plaque. Just the one near the path, shaded by a tree, where he used to sit and count hours between moments. Where he used to watch the world move past him like he wasn't there. Now, people stopped, not to stare, just to say hello. He nodded in return, hands in his lap, the photo of Margaret tucked in his coat pocket. That's where it always stayed. No speech, no parade, no plaque meant more than that image. It reminded him why he kept breathing, why he didn't disappear. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He never had. But sometimes when no one else was around and the wind cut low through the grass, he'd close his eyes and remember that firelit sky, that echo of a medic crying out in pain, and the sound of his own boots refusing to stop. And he'd think, "No man left behind, not even me." It had been nearly a year since the courtroom turned silent, since Travis Malone's name returned from the shadows. The world kept spinning, as it always does. News cycles shifted. Faces changed. But his story didn't vanish. It settled, quietly, into policy rooms, school lectures, and household conversations. It became part of the national conscience. Legislators in Washington referenced him during heated floor debates about veteran care. His name was spoken into congressional microphones, not as a headline, but as a case study in failure and redemption. The Grady Initiative, once a local legal aid effort, expanded statewide. Within months, 4 veterans who had been sleeping in subway tunnels were granted access to housing and retroactive benefits because someone asked a simple question. What if this man's story is like Malone's? In cities across the country, portraits of Travis began appearing in veteran clinics and shelters. The most circulated was that now iconic side-by-side image, one frame of him carrying the Afghan child, the other of him sleeping beneath a storefront awning in Brooklyn. That juxtaposition struck nerves. It forced conversations. It stirred guilt in some and action in others. Meanwhile, Travis kept his routine. He went to the park, he spoke at schools. He met weekly with caseworkers, helping other veterans navigate a system they barely trusted. He still avoided cameras. The more the world tried to frame him, the more he resisted becoming a symbol. But he understood the power of stories now, and he offered his when it mattered. One Wednesday afternoon, he was walking out of a community outreach center when he saw a familiar face near the curb. It was the young inmate from the holding cell, the one who'd slammed him against a wall and called him a fraud. The kid was thinner now, but sober, wearing a clean shirt and holding a folder full of papers. He looked startled, unsure whether to speak. Travis nodded first. The kid stepped forward, hesitant. "They reinstated my brother's medal last week," he said. They said your case helped push the review." Travis didn't respond. He didn't need to. "I'm sorry," the kid added. "I didn't know." Then he walked away, clutching the folder like it weighed everything he owned. That night, Judge Hughes stopped by Travis's apartment, unannounced. He carried a small box under his arm. "I found something in my father's attic," he said. "Old letters. One of them mentioned you by name. You met my dad once, didn't you? In Kuwait?" Travis nodded. He ran field logistics, always wore that Yankees cap. Hughes handed over the box. "He kept a letter you wrote him, about Margaret, about coming home. He never forgot it." Inside was a photo Travis hadn't seen in decades. Him and Margaret at a cookout, smiling, holding plastic cups, the sun hitting her hair just right. Behind them, a row of folding chairs, the kind you only use when you're still optimistic about guests. For a long time, neither man spoke. They didn't need to. That weekend, Travis attended a dinner hosted by the state's Department of Veterans Affairs. It wasn't formal. No one wore medals. The theme was simple: service, survival, and second chances. Travis was the closing speaker. He stood at the podium for several seconds before speaking. "I've learned that people don't fall through the cracks all at once," he began. "It happens gradually. A missed form, a wrong address, a door that doesn't open, a night spent outside that turns into a year." He paused. But survival isn't just about pushing through. It's about someone noticing, someone stopping, someone remembering. He didn't mention his Bronze Star. He didn't mention the courtroom. He didn't even mention Hughes by name. He just said, "No one gets out alone." That speech, recorded on a staff member's phone, circulated again, not virally this time, just steadily. It was played at a VA hospital in Ohio, a legal seminar in Austin, a city council meeting in Milwaukee. People weren't clapping for a hero anymore. They were learning from a man who had once been buried under bureaucracy and concrete and the city's own indifference, and somehow stood back up. That same week, the Department of Defense announced a new liaison program to track veterans transitioning to civilian life. They named it the Malone Pathway. Travis laughed when he heard. "Sounds like a park trail," he joked. In the hallway of a juvenile detention center in Queens, a counselor printed out that name and taped it above a corkboard filled with veteran outreach materials. A boy standing in line to make a call looked up and asked, "Who's that?" The counselor replied, "He's the reason this program exists." Back at Prospect Park, a school group on a field trip passed Travis sitting on his usual bench. One girl tugged her teacher's sleeve and whispered, "Is that the guy from the video?" The teacher nodded. Travis turned slightly and smiled at the group. The teacher leaned down and said, "You can go say thank you if you want." But the girl didn't move. She just watched, and for some reason, that was enough. When the day ended and the sun dipped behind the tree line, Travis remained on that bench, still, witnessing the world just as he had when no one noticed him. Only now, they did. On the morning of the next Veterans Day, Travis stood at the podium in Fort Hamilton's main assembly hall, dressed in his full military uniform. It had taken some convincing to get him to agree to the ceremony. The organizers insisted, said it would mean something to the others, especially the younger recruits. Eventually, he'd said yes, but only under one condition: no speeches about heroism, no montages, no talk of saving lives. Just truth. The hall was filled with service members, their families, students, and officials. Some remembered the headlines. Others had never heard his name before. But all of them listened. He looked out over the audience, then down at the simple note card in his hand. He didn't read from it. I used to think being forgotten was the worst thing that could happen to a person, he began. But it's not. The worst thing is when you start to believe you should be. He spoke plainly. No theatrics. No swelling music behind him. For years, I walked through this city like I didn't exist. I didn't ask for help because I didn't think I deserved it. I thought losing my wife meant losing my worth. I thought losing my benefits meant I didn't matter anymore. But I was wrong. He paused, letting the silence stretch just enough. This uniform doesn't make me a hero, and a courtroom didn't make me a victim. What I am is lucky. Lucky that someone remembered. Lucky that someone asked a question. He looked down briefly. And if my story means anything, let it mean this. There are others out there, right now, living like I was, waiting for someone to notice. He stepped away from the microphone. The crowd didn't erupt. They rose. Quietly, row by row. A room full of uniforms, from teenagers in basic training to gray-haired veterans with trembling hands, all of them standing, not to applaud, but to acknowledge. Later that day, Travis joined Judge Hughes and his family for a small gathering at their home. The judge's daughter, now in college, brought a framed copy of the plaque outside the courthouse and handed it to him. "I saw people taking selfies next to it," she said. "You're kind of famous." Travis chuckled. "Let's hope not for the wrong reasons." After dinner, they sat on the back porch, watching the sky darken. Hughes handed Travis a folded letter. "It's from a kid in one of the schools you spoke at," he said. "He asked me to give it to you." Travis unfolded the paper. It was written in pencil, blocky letters, uneven lines. "Dear Mr. Malone, my dad is a vet too. He sleeps in our car. I showed him your video. He cried. I think he's going to call someone tomorrow. Thank you for showing him it's not too late." Travis folded the letter slowly. He didn't say much after that. The next morning, he returned to Prospect Park. The bench was empty, as always, waiting. A city maintenance crew had recently installed a new plaque on its side. He hadn't asked for it, but someone had pushed it through. It read, "Travis Malone sat here. He once slept here. He helped us remember the cost of forgetting." He stayed for a few hours, nodding at passing joggers, petting the occasional dog, watching children chase each other through the grass. He noticed a teenage boy watching him from a distance, holding a copy of the city newspaper folded under one arm. The boy didn't approach. He just looked at Travis, then sat on a nearby bench and began writing in a notebook. Travis smiled, barely. That afternoon, he walked to the community center and met with a group of volunteers helping veterans navigate housing paperwork. A young woman waved him over to a table. "There's a man here who says he knew you, from Afghanistan. Wants to talk." Travis nodded and approached. The man stood. He was older, heavier, but the eyes were familiar. They embraced like brothers who had seen too much, said too little, and lived longer than either expected. They sat and talked for over an hour, about supply runs, near misses, a medic named Hughes who never stopped asking dumb questions. Before they parted, the man pulled out a photo from his wallet, a younger version of them both, leaning against a Humvee. "I thought you were gone," the man said. "I was," Travis replied. "But not anymore." As the year ended, he continued speaking. He gave interviews selectively. He helped establish a peer mentorship program for returning veterans. He was awarded a civilian honor from the city council, though he left it on a shelf beside his kitchen window, behind a jar of instant coffee and a stack of old maps. Sometimes he still walked through the neighborhoods where he once slept, not to revisit pain, but to remind himself how far he'd come. He never threw out his old boots. He never replaced the dog tags, even though the print was almost worn smooth. He never stopped carrying Margaret's photo. One night, he stood in front of the apartment mirror, adjusting his tie for a memorial event. His phone buzzed. A text from Judge Hughes. "You ready?" He stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. "Always." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. A city moved forward. And in one small apartment in Brooklyn, a man who had once vanished from sight slipped on a coat and locked his door, not to hide, but to go be seen. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. And if you're lucky, if you're patient, if you keep breathing long enough, it finds you. Even when the world forgets, even when you forget yourself, it finds you. And this time, it stays. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. We're deeply grateful for your presence and attention. This wasn't just a story about one man. It was a reminder that behind every face we pass on the street, there may be a lifetime of sacrifice, courage, and untold pain. It's a call for all of us to look a little closer, listen a little longer, and remember that justice delayed is still justice worth fighting for. If this story moved you in any way, we would truly appreciate your support. All it takes is a simple like, a comment to let us know where you're watching from and how this story made you feel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing forward stories that matter, that heal, and that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you again for being here.